At dawn I stood at the edge of my cornfield with my coffee steaming in the cold air when I saw a sight that snapped me awake harder than caffeine ever could, because overnight my rows of green had turned to a sickly yellow, birds lay still with wings outstretched like they had dropped mid-flight, and the earth itself smelled sharp and bitter like a cleaning aisle gone rotten. And right then my phone buzzed with a community app notification showing Karen bragging about how she took care of a pest problem next door, except the photo she posted showed my fence line in the background, her shadow bent over a sprayer, and my gut went ice cold because this wasn't just vandalism, it was a felony. I didn't scream or call anyone right away because that's not who I am. Instead I stood there breathing through the anger while the sunrise cut through the mist like molten copper and the rows of corn shimmered with poison dew, and I thought about how many seasons I had fought to make this land productive. How many nights I'd run irrigation lines while Karen and her friends held their HOA meetings about paint colors and mailbox heights, and I realized that for all her clout she had just overplayed her hand. As the morning rolled on I walked through the field, my boots crunching over dry stalks that had been healthy yesterday, and I found more clues. An empty jug tossed near the ditch with the label peeled but the chemical smell unmistakable, fresh tire tracks from her golf cart pressed into the soft soil near my irrigation pump, and one of her distinctive gardening gloves snagged on the barbed wire where she must have climbed through. Memories of past skirmishes came back. Her trying to find me for putting up a scarecrow too tall, her sneering when inspectors came to approve my grain silo, her laughing at the idea that a man like me could outsmart her committee. This time she had crossed from nuisance to criminal, and I wasn't about to give her a single inch. Instead of confronting her, I pulled out my phone and called a number I never thought I'd use except for emergencies: the state agriculture inspectors. My voice stayed calm as I described the dead wildlife, the chemical odors, and the visible evidence of unauthorized pesticide use, and they listened, took notes, and promised an unannounced visit within 48 hours. I hung up, feeling the first flicker of satisfaction cut through my fury, because now it wasn't just me versus Karen, it was the full weight of state law barreling toward her front door. Back at the house I started gathering my own evidence. Photos of every row, soil samples sealed in plastic bags, a copy of Karen's app post downloaded before she could delete it. The longer I worked the calmer I became, methodical and precise, imagining the look on her face when she realized the inspectors weren't coming for me but for her. By mid-morning Karen's sprinklers were running full blast across her own pristine lawn, masking the faint chemical smell drifting from her garage, and she strutted in a pink robe with a mug of tea like a queen surveying her moat, but I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes when she saw me photographing the tire tracks at the fence. She called out something about how I'd better not trespass, but her voice cracked, and she vanished inside clutching her phone. I knew she would spend the next day trying to cover her tracks, making calls to her HOA allies, maybe even hiring someone to clean up the evidence, but it was already too late. I imagined the inspectors arriving in unmarked trucks, stepping onto her lawn with clipboards and test kits, her neighbors peeking from windows as the queen bee got stung by her own poison. As night fell I stood again at the edge of the ruined cornfield, the scent of chemicals still heavy, the stars sharp above, and I felt strangely at peace despite the loss, because I had already set a trap she couldn't wriggle out of. This wasn't revenge for its own sake. It was justice, clean and official, and I knew by the time the week was out she would be facing not just fines but headlines, the kind of trouble that made HOA gossip seem like child's play. In that quiet moment I almost thanked her for pushing me this far, for handing me the rope she would hang herself with, and as I locked the gate behind me I could already hear the distant hum of state trucks in my imagination, closing in on her pastel-painted world, bringing the reckoning she had earned row by poisoned row. By the next morning Karen was already in motion, her panic disguised as confidence as she stomped across her perfectly trimmed yard in designer boots, shouting into her phone, glancing over at my ruined cornfield every few seconds as if the stalks themselves were accusing her, and even from my porch I could see her trying to orchestrate some desperate cover-up. The night before she had sent 2 teenage boys from down the street with shovels to dig at the edge of the drainage ditch, perhaps trying to bury the jug or scrape away the tire marks, but I had already photographed everything and bagged the soil, so their efforts were wasted. Inside my house I had built a quiet command center, spreading printed photos across the table, labeling bags of earth, matching timestamps from my security cameras with her online posts, and it felt strangely satisfying to be the calm eye of a storm she had stirred up herself. By mid-morning unmarked trucks rolled into the neighborhood, their plain white sides giving nothing away, and out stepped 3 state inspectors in boots and khaki jackets with field kits slung over their shoulders. I met them at the gate, handed over my samples, and led them along the perimeter where the damage began. They spoke in low voices, kneeling to take their own readings, clicking photos with state-issued phones, and their focus was absolute. Karen, watching from her porch, froze mid-sip of her tea when she saw their clipboards. She tried a smile, then vanished inside, the blinds snapping shut. I knew she was frantically calling the HOA president or maybe her cousin at the county office, but none of her connections mattered now because the evidence had been officially logged. The inspectors asked me to stay available while they extended their investigation, and I nodded, keeping my expression neutral even though my pulse thrummed with anticipation. Around noon Karen made her first big mistake. She came striding over in oversized sunglasses with a brittle smile, pretending she was concerned about my pest problem, offering unsolicited advice about pest control companies, and loudly announcing to the inspectors that she had been keeping an eye out for unusual activity. One inspector asked her point-blank if she had used any substances near the property line, and she laughed too loudly, denying everything while her hands fluttered like nervous bird. Then she turned on me, accusing me of planting evidence, of trying to frame her for an insurance payout, and the inspectors simply wrote everything down without reaction. After she stalked off, one of them quietly asked me to provide the community app post she'd made earlier, and I handed over the screenshot, watching their eyebrows rise as they saw her own words incriminating her. That afternoon they spread out across her yard, taking soil samples from her flower beds and driveway cracks, and the sight of them kneeling on her immaculate lawn with metal probes was like a reverse coronation, the dethroning of a self-appointed queen. Neighbors began to drift outside, pretending to water plants or check mail, phones discreetly raised to capture the scene, and whispers floated down the street like dry leaves. Karen's carefully cultivated reputation as the enforcer of HOA rules was crumbling in real time, and I could almost hear the dominoes tipping one by one. At one point she emerged with a tray of lemonade, her voice sugary as she tried to charm the inspectors, but they refused politely, focused on their work, and she retreated, her smile cracking. In the late afternoon a delivery truck arrived bearing official seals, unloading more testing equipment, and Karen's little dog barked hysterically as men in gloves set up sample coolers and sealed evidence bags. I stayed back, letting the process unfold, my own camera rolling quietly from a window so that every detail was preserved. It struck me then how far we had come from the days when Karen could scold me about fence heights or mailbox colors. This was no longer neighborhood theater but a full-on state case unfolding on her front lawn. As the sun dropped low, the inspectors finished their initial sweep and spoke briefly with me, explaining they had enough to warrant a full report and likely a referral to the Environmental Crimes Division. I thanked them quietly, feeling the weight of vindication settle in my chest. Across the street Karen paced with her phone pressed to her ear, her gestures sharp and frantic, her lawn forgotten, her sprinklers off, her kingdom in free fall. That night the neighborhood group chat exploded with speculation, screenshots, and grainy videos. People who had feared her suddenly emboldened to share their own stories of her petty power plays, and for the first time I saw her name written not as a punchline but as a cautionary tale. As darkness fell and the inspectors' trucks rolled away, I stood at my gate again, the poisoned cornfield behind me and the echo of their boots still in my ears, and I knew the real storm was only just beginning. By dawn 2 days later the entire neighborhood had shifted from curiosity to open theater as the state inspectors returned with a larger team carrying sealed crates, a drone, and even a uniformed environmental crimes officer whose badge glinted in the sun, and the sound of their boots on Karen's driveway was like a drumroll announcing the finale of a show she never wanted to star in. I stayed on my porch, coffee in hand, watching them unload equipment and unfurl yellow tape across sections of my cornfield and her back lawn while neighbors lined the sidewalks pretending to jog or walk dogs, their phones raised to capture every second. Karen emerged in a navy pantsuit, her hair perfectly styled, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her as she tried to project authority, calling out questions about warrants and property rights that only made her look more cornered. The inspectors did not even glance up. They were too busy photographing her garden shed, the hoses coiled near her fence, and the hidden stash of chemical jugs now uncovered behind a stack of decorative planters. When they produced their own screenshots of her bragging post and matched it with the labels on the seized containers, the color drained from her face, and she backed into her garage, slamming the door as cameras clicked and neighbors whispered. It was almost surreal to see her fortress of influence collapse in real time, her allies silent, the HOA president suddenly unavailable, and the whispers spreading that she might face not only fines but criminal charges for agricultural contamination. Meanwhile, I provided a measured statement to a local reporter who had shown up after the news spread through social media, explaining how the inspectors had acted swiftly, how the community deserved better stewardship. My words calm and factual but carrying the weight of someone who had endured too many petty battles. Karen tried a last-ditch maneuver, striding out with a clipboard and a hastily printed "cease and desist" notice claiming I was trespassing by allowing inspectors on her lawn, but the officer simply folded it in half and handed it back, citing state law that superseded HOA bylaws, and for a moment Karen just stood there blinking as though the world had turned upside down. As the investigation dug deeper, unexpected secrets began spilling out. The inspectors discovered she had been dumping runoff from an illegal pesticide side hustle into a shared drainage channel, and that her allies on the HOA board had been covering for her in exchange for discounted services, a revelation that rippled through the neighborhood like a shockwave. People who once defended her began forwarding emails to the authorities, offering testimony, and by midday it was clear that the inspectors were building a much larger case than anyone had anticipated. The officers carried out boxes of records, sealed samples, and even one of her laptops, each item catalogued while Karen hovered nearby, pale and silent now, her pink robe swapped for the stiff suit of someone bracing for court. Through it all I remained steady, offering access to my footage, signing affidavits, and keeping my head down even as whispers of admiration drifted my way from neighbors who had once kept their distance. By late afternoon the inspectors held a brief press statement at the edge of the street, confirming the investigation into illegal pesticide use and environmental contamination, and while they stopped short of naming her directly, everyone knew. Karen had retreated inside by then, her blinds drawn, her sprinklers still off, her little dog whining at the door. I walked back to the cornfield, now crisscrossed with markers and flags, and knelt to touch the poisoned soil, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and relief, because while my crop was ruined my name was clear and my patience vindicated. That evening a sheriff's car rolled quietly up the street and an officer served Karen with an official summons, and though the details were private the sight of her signing the papers at her own doorstep, lips pressed into a thin line, was the image everyone would remember. As dusk settled the neighborhood chat filled with memes, jokes, and long stories of her past abuses, the queen dethroned, her empire of petty rules dissolving into public ridicule. In the quiet after the trucks left and the neighbors retreated inside, I walked my fence line one last time, locking the gate with deliberate calm, the sunset throwing gold light across the broken stalks of corn and the distant hills beyond. I knew I would replant next season, and that the soil would recover, but more than that I knew the balance of power had shifted permanently. No more midnight threats, no more smug committee notices shoved under my door. As I headed back to the house, The sound of crickets rose from the ditch and a cool wind carried the faint scent of fresh earth where inspectors had dug test holes, and I felt the tight coil in my chest finally unwind. Justice had not come as a shout or a dramatic showdown but as a steady, relentless tide backed by evidence and law, and in the end it had swept her away while leaving me standing quietly on my porch, hands steady, eyes on the horizon, already imagining the rows of green that would rise again next spring in soil scrubbed clean of both poison and her shadow.